Oh, it feels like it's been a while, but it's good to be back. Welcome everybody to Beirut in Lebanon. Lebanon is of course a little country in the Middle East, an area which, as I'm sure you know by now, I'm fascinated with. However, it's also got one of the worst reputations from our Western perspective, owing to a lot of political and other issues. The best known issue is probably the civil war that raged from, well, when our parents were kids up until even some of our childhoods, and even now there is a financial crisis going on right now, today. But I'm not really here to talk about all that. I'm here to have a look at what the place is really like as somewhere to visit. And the first thing we've stumbled across on today's adventure is, well, this, somewhere behind this fence. This is Sursok Palace, named after the guy who built it in 1860, and back then it would have been one of the grandest townhouses in Beirut, and it is definitely today's largest and swankiest palace to survive from that period. What a weapon! This behind me, this mad egg-shaped contraption, is called, imaginatively, the Egg. This was a cinema built in 1965, and inside it was a cinema that was in use and much loved by the public until the 1970s, when the Civil War broke out, and it basically became the front line between the East and the West. And I do believe if I just do this, I can kind of just get into it. I am officially inside the Egg. I believe the Egg was supposed to make up part of what was going to be a big fancy new complex for Beirut, which is what I'm in now. The Egg's back through there a little bit, but as you can see, it was quite attacked in the war. Being up here does give us a pretty good view of the Al Amin Mosque just there behind us. Those minarets are 215 feet tall. It's also known as the Blue Mosque, obviously, because of its blue bits. And yeah, it's built in 2008. It's pretty swanky, that. And this would have been the main cinema area, this being all the seats, and this being the main screen. This was previously off limits to the public while the city was being reconstructed after the whole catastrophe of that civil war, but end of last year, about October 2019, more protests started. Everyone broke in, people started hosting private raves and film nights and stuff here, and now it's just kind of here to be walked into. Alright, so now we're down at ground level. Seems to me like this mosque is kind of a sign for protests and such. Can't say I know precisely what it's all about, but I would probably put it down to the current financial crisis, everyone losing jobs and wanting a new government and all of that. There's a lot of tents though. It's pretty serious business, this. And I think this would have been a bank a couple of months ago, before all the protests. Bloody hell. Anyway, back to sightseeing. Next thing we've ended up coming across is what's called the Petit Surreal. There's nothing all that important about this. It was like a really old like garden square thing almost in the city. This was built in 1884, but the cool thing about this was buried and forgotten about for years until the bombing happened, and in 1970 something it destroyed a building, the bombing, and revealed the ruins of this underneath. And exactly the same thing happened to the building next to the Blue Mosque, the St. George Maronite Cathedral, originally built in 1767, was bombed in 1975 along with a lot of Beirut. But similar to Le Petit Serail, the bombing actually ended up revealing some really old ruins. In that case was a Byzantine church, which is now a museum, and the cathedral itself has of course been rebuilt fully. And here we've got some ruins of the old Roman Beirut, as it was known then. Beirut, and indeed Lebanon as a whole, was in fact occupied by the Romans from 64 BC for the next 7 centuries. But it doesn't end there, because Lebanon has also been occupied by 15 other kingdoms or countries, whatever you want to call them, in its 4,000 years of history. However, it has never changed its name. It has always been called Lebanon for the entire 4,000 year history of the country, and therefore it is the oldest country name in the whole world. Lebanon is also the country that has the most books written about it in the whole world, and the name Lebanon itself appears in the Old Testament 75 times. And here's another odd one for you. That nightclub over there is called Sky Bar, and that Sky Bar is allegedly voted as the best nightclub in the whole world. I don't really know who decides that, but no, I'm not going to go and have a look, because it's not Matrix and Grimsby, and I'm a man of simple taste, so I'm going to have to take their word for it. Best nightclub in the world, that. Now, we've seen a few churches today, some quite important ones. It's in the Old Testament a lot of times. It's a very historically important place, blah blah blah. Lewis, are we not supposed to be in the Middle East where everyone's a Muslim? Well, actually, Lebanon's population is approximately 40% Christian, which of course is a mile above any other Middle Eastern country's Christian ratio. That diversity is a really big thing for Lebanon, not only as something to celebrate, but it also trickles into the way that the political setup is kind of constructed, and it's that system that most of the people in Lebanon seem pretty mad about. But despite all the issues at hand, it's still a very pleasant place to walk around. Look at this, bloody yachts everywhere. So, Sitrep, what does it actually feel like as a place to walk around and stuff? Well, it's a bit weird actually, because there's obviously a very, very big issue at hand, which is that all of the public feel pretty angry about whatever's happening in the government and financial stuff at the minute. That's quite obvious. There's spray paint on pretty much every building you can see in the centre of the city, but there are some places that are more or less sensitive than others, and suddenly you end up 10 minutes out of the centre and you've got a big promenade to walk on. There are yachts, there's a nice beach and stuff. Overall, it's a pretty nice place to be. I mean, look at it for one, but in some places there's a lot of military, there's a lot of security, which I suppose is to be expected, but then still everyone's got Porsches and Hummers and Dodges with fat spoilers and Range Rovers, and obviously there's about 1,000 yachts just down there. And yeah, basically in one part of the city everything feels pretty rosy, and you might as well be in Spain. In other parts of the city it's very clear you're in a post-war country that's now in a very different kind of crisis. So it's interesting. This building behind me, this incredibly thin building, is only 2 feet wide and is known as the world's greatest example of sibling rivalry. It was built in 1954, and despite how skinny it is, you can obviously see that people do live in it. They are apartments, and the reason for it goes as follows. So 2 brothers inherited land from their dad, which is of course this bit of land, and in fact does have a magnificent sea view on it. However, they kept arguing about how best to split the land, and a bit of the land was this really weird thin sliver but way smaller than the rest of it, and one of the brothers went, you know what, I'm bored of this, I'll have that thin weird bit. Other brother goes, alright, fine, you can have it. So what brother one did, aka the pettiest man in the universe, aka the guy that did exactly as I would do in this situation, is he built a block of apartments really tall just in front of where the rest of the land is, which not only stops his other brother, brother two, the world's angriest brother now, from having a wonderful sea view like he's just got, but now it means that he can't sell his property for it either, because all of his residents are going to just be facing a wall. The building at its very widest point does extend to a whopping 13 feet, helped as well by the balconies sticking out to make it feel a bit wider. And the best thing about this is this act of absolute pettiness and begrudgery is never going to get knocked down, because since that was built, the city's zoning laws have changed, meaning that if they do bring it down, there is nothing at all that could possibly be built in its place, and so it's more profitable having it there as apartments than taking it down completely. What a thing to do. Just have a look at what you could have won, brother number two. I seem to have ended up in a deserted theme park thing. Not gonna lie, this is quite weird. Alright, so it's not actually deserted, it's just extremely quiet and quite broken. I don't really know who works here, there was no actual entrance. It's a pretty creepy place, this. This is where the tickets are supposed to be bought. Anyway, moving on. That was Luna Park, a little amusement park in Beirut. Quite peculiar. I don't know what all this stuff is. I feel like it might have been resorts or something. Pretty abandoned now though. And how about this for some timing? It's just approached sunset, and here we've got the Pigeon Rocks. Not a bad view to end the video on, is it? So Beirut, lots of spray paint, lots of barbed wire, lots of closed off streets, but definitely an interesting start to the trip. Got another couple of weeks left while I'm off home, so fairly optimistic. And yeah, these are the Pigeon Rocks. Got no idea why they're called that, but they are, and it's definitely like Lebanon's romantic spot. It's the bit that everyone takes selfies with, so might as well join in with that. Cheers boys, in a bit.